Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. My name is Kristen Kohler, and I am the president of the Reading League California chapter. You are with us tonight on our very final event of our inaugural year as being a chapter. And we are so lucky tonight to have Dr. Claude Goldenberg with us to talk with us. But before we turn it over to him, I'm going to do a couple of standard announcements while the last few people trickle in. I want to let you know that the Reading League California is an all nonprofit, all volunteer organization. We are run by educators, administrators, and passionate literacy experts from all over California. I want you to know that donations and membership dues go right back into our organization. This lets us continue to bring you free, high quality content and increase the knowledge about the science of reading throughout California. So we are recording tonight's event and it will be sent to all the registrants. We will also post the recording on our YouTube channel, and any resources that we come up with tonight will be sent out via email after the event. I want to thank Mara Shin Smith for sitting in and co-piloting tonight. We are so lucky to have her with us. And I want to introduce our speaker, Dr. Claude Goldenberg. Claude, you're going to have to help me perhaps pronounce this. Claude is the Nomalini and Oliver, is that correct?
Olivier, like
Olivier.
Sir Laurence Olivier.
I thought I would get stuck on Nomalini. I got stuck on the other word. The Nomalini and Olivier, Professor of Education Emeritus at Stanford University. He received his A.B. in History from Princeton University and M.A. and Ph.D. from the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Los Angeles. He has taught junior high school in San Antonio, Texas, and first grade in a bilingual elementary school in Los Angeles. He's a native of Argentina, and his areas of research centered on promoting academic achievement among language minority students, particularly those from Spanish-speaking backgrounds. He was on the National Research Council's Committee for the Prevention of Early Reading Difficulties in Young Children, and on the National Literacy Panel, which synthesized research on literacy development among language minority children and youth. He continues to write and speak and volunteer and consult on literacy research and policy and on promoting literacy development among students not yet proficient in English. We are so excited that you are our capstone event tonight. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Goldenberg. I believe, unless there's any other housekeeping, Mara, that you can think of, we can turn it over to Claude.
I can't think of anything else. Claude, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
Let me know. Okay.
Yep, I will do that now.
We'll save some questions for Claude at the end. And if you have questions as we go along, please drop them in the chat and I'll collect them and we'll do them at the end.
Let's see here. I've discovered a new way to share my screen that, see, I think I know how to do it. Let's see here. Oh gosh, it's not working. Hold on. Don't go away. Don't go away. I'm not giving up just yet. Okay. Here we go.
We'll stay.
Yeah. I hope it's worth your time. Let's see, share. And then I have to go into, why is it not doing what it's, there we go. Go into portion of screen. And then I share. Ah.
Aha. Looks good.
And you should see just the title, right? And you don't see all the clutter and my notes and my sticky notes and my and my paste-its and bookmarks and stuff. Okay, great. So success. I'm going to declare victory here. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Kristen. Thanks so much. And thanks to you, Mara. I'm delighted to be here. So let me see. So I definitely want to leave time. What time should I aim for ending? Like 7:20 or something like that? Would that be a good idea? Or
that would be perfect.
Okay. So, okay, great. So I'm going to talk about, as advertised, the foundation of effective literacy practices and why it's harder for English learners and their teachers. I'm assuming that's not a controversial statement. It is harder. And not because there's anything wrong with English learners, but they're learning the language as they're learning to read and write it. So it's just a tougher agenda. It's a tougher lift for the kids. And if it's tougher for the kids, it's going to be for the teachers. And as a sort of a subtitle, I'm going to hit pretty hard, there you go, on why fluency is particularly critical for English learners. It's important for everyone, but it's particularly critical for English learners. And I hope by the end of my talk, you'll see why. And if you don't, then you got 10 minutes to call me on it. Okay, so I'd like you to read this sentence. You can read it aloud, you can read it to yourself. If you're sitting with someone, read it to someone, but I'd like you to take a good stab at reading the sentence, preferably read it aloud to yourself. Okay, everyone had a reasonable chance to do that? Good. So let me ask you, and just put it in the chat very briefly, by what grade level, ideally, would you want students to be able to read this sentence? Just students in general. I mean, you know, your typical, just regular student, by what grade level should they be able to read this sentence fluently? Like they know what it means. Just put that in the chat if you wouldn't mind. Okay, seeing the chat. I'm seeing some answers here. Whoops, don't mean to show you my chat. Fifth grade, middle school, fifth, sixth, right, question mark, fourth. Okay, so this is yeah, upper elementary, middle school, I think we agree is, would generally be what you're aiming for here. Now, what if you had to read this sentence like this? Natural natural resource can determine a country economic output and production. What if you had to read it like that? Well, what you have, ladies and gentlemen, I think most of you are ladies, but in case there's some gentlemen, what you have is a bottleneck, right? That is a classic bottleneck where you can't do something fluency because there's something kind of blocking you from doing it fluently. Now, we know that becoming a proficient reader involves many components, right? Knowing the sounds of the language and the letters that correspond to those or represent those sounds, using letters and sounds to read and spell words. This is typically what we think of as part of the word recognition strand, right, of Scarborough's rope, which everyone I'm sure is familiar with. And these are typically called foundational literacy skills, right? No disagreement on that. But in fact, becoming a proficient reader involves many more components than foundational literacy skills. It involves everything else. Like what? Well, like understanding the words, like having the background knowledge to understand what you're reading, like sufficient language proficiency for comprehension and comprehension skills, and some other things as well. This is a non-exhaustive but reasonably comprehensive list of what becoming a proficient reader requires. So let me take a little detour, as we say in the biz, under the hood. This is a graphic representation of our friend, the brain. We all have one to one degree or another. And it's from a website. All of the references that I'm going to refer to here are in the reference list at the end of the PowerPoint deck. And by the way, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint deck if anyone wants to download it. Kristen or Mara, I'm happy to send it to you afterwards. And I would encourage you to take a look at the references. This one in particular is a really nice thing that's right on the web. So you can take a look at the article and the graphics that I've stolen from Stanislas Dehaene. because it's very informative. But basically, what it's showing you is what happens under the hood, between your ears, in your head, and what needs to happen in order to become a reader. And what happens there is that learning to read essentially involves going from speech to print. Now, that was a very famous phrase by Louisa Moats in one of the most influential books we have. And in fact, just the title is influential because it makes you realize that reading literacy is really requiring going from speech to print, and then from print to speech, being able to go back and forth. That's what reading and writing is fundamentally. And what needs to happen is a reading circuit needs to be created in the brain. Now, full disclosure, I am not a neuroscientist. I try to understand what they've found. I think I understand it reasonably well. But if I get anything wrong, don't blame me, blame the neuroscientists, because they're the ones who've taught me this. I think it's right, though, at a very superficial level. And what has to happen, and just follow, you can follow along with me, learners who know the language, and this is a quote from another reference that is also in the reference list, it's very informative. Learners who know the language rely on a large network of brain regions as they try to bind orthography, right, the spelling system, to an already present knowledge of phonology, right, the sounds of the language, and semantics, which is the meaning carried by language. That the bind, and that's really, it's a common, it's a like a, you know, it's a tier 2 word, right, because it's sort of common, but it's tier 3 in this context because it's a technical word that's used in the literature, in the neuro-linguistic literature. This was from an article in the Journal of Neurolinguistics, which again is in the references. By the way, if there are articles back in the references that are PDFs behind those nasty paywalls, just email me and I'm happy to send you a PDF. And they use the word bind orthography to phonology to semantics. That's what needs to happen in the brain to become literate. This reading circuit has got to be constructed that is not present at birth. All the components are there at birth. We can see, we can hear, we start to make sense of the language that's coming in. But the reading circuit literally has to be constructed over the course of a few years to enable literacy. Now, what happens is that this vast brain circuit is literally transformed. And this is right from Dehaene. All the regions that are shown in red increase their activation and specialization during the acquisition of literacy. It can literally be tracked in their fMRI paraphernalia. A massive bundle of connections link the visual areas of the brain with the regions involved in phonological coding, in other words, making sense of the sounds of the language. And as a result, we gain the ability to access the spoken language system through vision. Now, think about that. Whoops, I went too quickly. Think about that. Access the spoken language system through vision. That is extremely profound because what it's telling you is you develop the spoken language system, you know, absent some developmental delay. I mean, we know there are exceptions. By and large, you develop the oral language system really very, I mean, without necessary effort, very naturally, as long as you're surrounded by people who speak and understand and respond to the language. You develop the spoken language system. But in order to read, you have to access that oral language system visually. And the only way that can happen is by connecting the visual system, see right back here, the visual cortex, and then the visual word form area. The visual cortex has got to get hooked into the regions involved in spoken language. That's what needs to happen under the hood in order to become literate. Okay? Now, the same is true for English learners. Call them emergent bilinguals, multilingual learners, whatever we call them. The same thing is true for emergent bilinguals, English learners. Learning to read in a language you're learning is basically the same thing as learning to read in a language you know. Why? Because they involve similar networks of brain activation. It's the same brain. You may have two languages going on, which is a plus in all sorts of ways that I don't need to convince anyone about. But the same circuitry has got to be created, linking the visual written language with the spoken oral language, and then connecting that to the semantics, the meaning system of the language. Regardless of whether you're monolingual, bilingual, first language, second language, the same thing has to happen to become literate in that language. Now, remember that the figure that I showed you before has to do with learners who know the language. It's the same diagram. It's true whether monolingual or a bilingual. Excuse me. But it refers to learners who know the language, because the caption underneath says, rely on a large network of brain regions as they try to bind orthography to an already present knowledge of phonology and semantics. Well, that's exactly what English learners lack, an already present knowledge of the language's phonology, the sound system, and the semantics, what the words mean, how syntax works, the morphology. Those are the things that are involved in learning a language. And as a result of all of this, learning to read, learning the idea of reading and progressing as a reader is harder in a second language, because there is literally more to learn. But the same things need to happen. The same kind of connections and circuitry need to be constructed. So language learners, as a result of this, will require additional supporting brain regions. Why? Well, as I said, because they have no or limited. We know that English learners come in varying degrees of proficiency in English, or even in various proficiencies of literacy, understanding, and skill. But regardless, as they're learning the language, their brains need to be provided additional support so that the written language, the symbols that represent the written language, can be connected with the sound system of the language that they're learning as well, and the semantic system of the language, which they're learning as well. So that's what needs to happen under the hood. But, you know, we're teachers. We don't directly teach brains, although indirectly you do. We teach kids. So the question we are concerned with is, what additional supports do English learners need in beginning and early literacy? Well, fortunately, we have a number of very good studies, at least two that I draw on all the time, that will help us understand. And we know from these studies, and I'll get to them in a little bit, we need to clarify the words and texts that kids are learning to read, are being taught to read, with visuals, gestures, and expressions. You know, sometimes this is called integrated ELD, sometimes it's called sheltered instruction, but these are all things to make instruction meaningful. You want to define the words that are in the directions, trace and copy and so forth. You also want to define and highlight and illustrate 2 or 3 key vocabulary words a day. And key vocabulary words here, I'm referring to words that are being used to teach the reading skills. Because think of it, if you know the language, the words that are used in beginning reading are again, absent some developmental delay, the words that are used to teach early reading skills, whether it's phonemic awareness or letter sound associations or phonics or decoding, they're words already in the vocabulary of your typical 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old. Run, dog, dad. You don't need to teach those words to a normally developing English speaker. But you can't assume that those words are known to a child, or even an adult for that matter, who's simultaneously learning the language as they're learning to read and write it. So those are the words that are used to teach the reading skills, to teach letter sound associations. You know, we like to use words that have some mnemonic value when you're teaching the letter, right? The most prevalent one is S for snake. Well, in Spanish, snake is víbora. So snake would not be a very good mnemonic if you don't know the meaning of the word, right? The word can only be a mnemonic if the shape and the sound and the meaning correspond to the learner. So if you're going to use mnemonics for a kid learning the language, you either have to teach the word snake so that they know what it means and it's intuitively meaningful, or use a word that is already known to them that serves as a mnemonic. Same thing with decoding or recognition. And I'll get into this a little bit later. You want to use words that the children know the meanings of the words. Otherwise, they can't recognize words that they don't already know. They can decode them, but they won't necessarily be able to recognize them because they've never seen them before. They don't understand what they mean. Then you want to encourage English language use and student responses with that key vocabulary. It's not just about vocabulary lessons, although those are important, but you want to encourage using the language productively and receptively. And you want to do things like guide students with story retelling using the key vocabulary. You want them to incorporate the key vocabulary words that they're learning to read and are being used to teach reading skills. You want them to become part of their functioning vocabulary, which involves, as you know, more than just memorizing definitions. I mean, that's a starting point, but you want them to be part of their functioning vocabularies. You want to use guided book and story discussions and retelling with key vocabulary. So let me back up a second and talk a little bit more, choose a different, we talked about what's under the hood, and now I want to change metaphors. I like travel metaphors because I've been traveling a lot since I retired. And this is a travel metaphor that actually maps on to Scarsborough's rope, because I want you to think about literacy as a journey. Literacy as a journey that begins in two distinct places with two distinct paths, starting in two places, either geographically or in your brain. It maps onto the brain thing as well. So if you like your metaphors mixed or embellished, they both work. So we have two paths starting from different places, but having to converge to get to the destination. And what's the destination? Well, it's literacy. That's what we're shooting for here, literacy. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the house of literacy, way out there in the horizon. But it takes paths to get there, and the paths have got to converge in order for full literacy to be facilitated, to be enabled. That house of literacy is the metaphor. And now I'm going to move from my metaphor and let's get a little bit more literal. And this, in essence, is what we know from the science of reading or reading research, whatever you want to call it. I prefer to call it reading research because science of reading has become so kind of loaded and almost kind of toxic in some conversation. But we're talking about reading research, what we know from reading research. And there are a lot of details and issues, but basically this is it. And again, this maps on very nicely to Scarsborough's rope. You have the word recognition pathway, foundational literacy skills, and then you have everything else, language, meaning, etc. These are all very familiar. I don't need to belabor the points, what's going on with word recognition, what's going on with everything else. And then we have, and this is what I'm going to really focus on a lot, and then we have fluency. Fluency. What is fluency? Well, fluency is really very, very important, and in some ways more important than you might actually realize. Remember this, the pathways connecting? Well, that bridge right there is fluency. And we typically think of fluency as something that enables comprehension, right? If you don't read roughly 40 words a minute, 50 words a minute by the end of the first grade, and then roughly 70, you have these benchmarks, 70 or so, but on the second grade and so forth. If you read haltingly, as I did my illustration at the top of the show, then you can't comprehend. But fluency works both ways. Fluency enables comprehension, but it also reflects comprehension. Because I'm going to give you a definition of fluency that you might already be familiar with that shows how fluency is actually the bridge to reading comprehension, because it goes both ways. Fluency enables comprehension, but true fluency reflects comprehension. So I'm just setting this up because I'm going to get to that shortly, but I just want to, it's almost like a Netflix series, I just want to build the anticipation so that you're ready for, well, there's several punchlines here, but I want you to be ready for all of them. Now, we talked about the pathways to literacy metaphorically. We talked pathways to literacy more literally. So now let's think about what are the practices to enable students to travel the paths to literacy. This gets very practical. You know, we talk about manipulating sounds in words. That's what your phonemic awareness instruction is about. We talk about activities to learn letters and sounds, alphabet charts, alphabet chants, the different mnemonics that we use. We talk about explicit teaching of phonics rules. I mean, the most important basic ones are CVC, of course, and CVCE, and CVAC. If I'm remembering my phonic rules. And then, of course, using those, applying them to decoding words. And then you want to engage in dictation to practice hearing sounds and writing the words, whether individual spelling words or larger stretches of words. And then what do we need to facilitate everything else? Well, we need to do read alouds. We need to have discussions and conversations. We need to expose students and teach and preview vocabulary. We need to have lessons and activities to gain knowledge. We need to use films and other media, field trips, if you're lucky enough to have field trips and other real-world activities. Now, note that all of these things contribute to fluency. You know, for example, exposing, teaching, previewing vocabulary, those contribute to fluency. You think about the sentence in the bottle. If you don't know the words, it's harder to recognize them and read them correctly. Notice that I read determine as determine. Now, determine is actually pretty accurate from a decoding standpoint, but definitely not from a word recognition standpoint. I'm willing that the student I pretended to be didn't really have determine in his or her active vocabulary. So when he or she read determine, it probably sounded strange, but they didn't have really any good alternatives. But because the rest of the sentence was basically opaque to them, then it was impossible to actually read the word correctly, much less fluently. So knowing the words and being able to decode the words all contribute to fluent word recognition. But again, remember, English learners are learning the language as they're learning to read and become literate in it. It's a tougher lift. And how can it not be? Not because of any deficits or any lacks. They just have more to learn and to coordinate in order to become fluent. And therefore, there's more for teachers to think about and have to enact. But fluency involves all of these things, all of these attributes. It's not just a question of reading words more quickly. It's not just a question of hitting the 40 words a minute, 70 words a minute, 100 words a minute benchmarks. Those are meaningful indicators to an extent, but there's more to real fluency than simply quickness and accuracy of word reading. And lack of fluency, to get back to my other metaphor, if you'll pardon my metaphor mixtures here, it creates the bottleneck. And one of the things we have to be very concerned about is eliminating the bottleneck, because it is deadly to comprehension and reading development. So how can we prevent and eliminate bottlenecks? Well, there are basically two ways, as I understand it. One is to recognize that fluency is more than reading words quickly, right? You have accuracy, reading words correctly. You have automaticity, which is recognizing words quickly, easily, and effortlessly. It's almost a reflex. I remember I was making one presentation and someone said, yeah, you know, once my son learned to read, he said, I'm reading all the words. I can't help it, I'm reading. That's automaticity. And sometimes it happens by itself. Sometimes it needs to be worked on, but that's what automaticity is. You recognize them quickly, easily, and effortlessly. But fluency is also appropriate rate, reading a speed that fits the context, and perhaps most often ignored or neglected is fluency also involves expression. The technical term is prosody, reading with inflection, intonation, attending to punctuation, reading meaningfully. So that's one way to prevent and eliminate bottlenecks, recognizing that fluency is more than just reading words correctly. Number two, you have to be mindful that fluency is an ongoing goal. Whatever the skill, whether it's recognizing letters, sounds, word, reading text, you have to go for accuracy, get it right, then automaticity, quickly, easily, effortlessly, almost a reflex. And then when you're reading text, in addition to accuracy and automaticity, you have to emphasize appropriate rate, reading at the right speed, and expression with prosody, reading meaningfully with inflection and intonation. And the fact is that you can engage in these activities, reading fluently, almost from the very beginning. Now, this is a page out of, I'm sure you all recognize it, out of SIPS. If you're doing SIPS, one of the early literacy programs that we have and has been implemented, Mara can tell you all about it if you don't know about it. Even if you're doing something like SIPS, you can practice fluency in the true sense of the word. Now, I often see teachers using text like this to practice accuracy. That's good. To practice automaticity, that's okay. But then they don't get to appropriate speed and prosody. And the bottom line is you have to, because if you don't start working on fluency early on, kids don't necessarily get the idea that you're reading something meaningful. Now, this is a very simple text, but I've seen it used in a way that completely bypasses. There's a bit of a riddle going here, a cute little, Q&A. What is it? Can you get bit? Yes, you can. Is it big? Now, this is meaningful. This is meaningful text. It's simple, it's decodable, it's perfectly appropriate for the level at which the kids were reading at, but we're bypassing meaning. We're bypassing any comprehension, any sense that what we're reading here has meaning, and you want to read it as if it had meaning. So you can set up a number of possibilities. You can make it a Q&A. For example, you could have the teacher or one student ask the question, and then someone else answer it. You want to make it it lends itself to making a dialogue, actual communicative language between two or more individuals. Now, as you get older, and we'll talk about that in a bit, you can use reader's theater, right? You can use more something more appropriate for older kids and adolescents. But the idea is the same. To communicate from the beginning, the text has meaning. It's more than just a concatenation of words that you have to read according to some stopwatch or clock. And one of the most important prompts that you should have in your prompt toolkit as a teacher is read it like you're talking. So if a child were to read this, can you get bit, flat like that? First thing you might do is say, good job, you read all the words correctly. What's that thing at the end? You see that squiggle at the end? What is that? Maybe the kid doesn't know. Don't assume they know. Well, it's a question mark. It means you're asking a question. Now, when you're asking a question, do you read it, can you get bit? Or do you read it like this? Can you get bit? So model fluent reading. Model fluent reading that respects the words and the punctuation, because that's part of fluency as well, knowing the punctuation. So once you establish that, and you establish the contrast between reading, can you get bit? And an answer, yes, you can, then read the rest of it as a question and answer. You can take turns, you can do round robin, you can do teacher to student, student to teacher. I don't need to give you creative ideas because I know all of you have them. But the big idea here is read this text respecting the meaning that it represents. And then, of course, you can talk about it. You can talk about experiences with these different animals, embellish, but you really want to focus on fluency here because that's the thing that I see routinely being ignored. So that's very important. I'm going to stop right here and see if people either in the chat or Mara, last time I talked about this, you had some ideas for like I used the same text as I recall.
You did.
So I'm going to stop here and I want to know if you have anything to add or other suggestions you might have or that people listening. I'm going to just stop talking because I've just been talking way too much.
We like listening to you talk, Claude. Okay, well, the suggestion that I had when Claude presented this to the Lancaster CLSD grant schools that he worked, we partner with Claude and with this partnering district. And I said, this could even be almost like a reader's theater when they partner read, right? So someone's asking the question and then the partner would be answering it. So can you get bit? And the other students say, yes, you can. And, kind of that back and forth and getting used to that. So my recommendation was like, if I were going to use this text in my classroom and I'm practicing fluency, and like Claude said, make sure that they're accurate before they, you have to have accuracy before that automaticity piece. I would make multiple copies and just highlight 2 different colors depending on who's reading what, because it might be too much for students to be looking at, especially if they're in some sort of intervention or acceleration program. You really want to make sure that visually it looks different. If not, their eyes are all over the page. So that was just one suggestion that I had.
Good. So I still have just a couple more slides, but I'd be interested in if anyone else has any idea they want to suggest to others or that you've thought of.
I have a question,
Yep.
and maybe you're going this direction, but some of what you are describing with fluency makes me think about English learners who I know who have cracked the code and become quite fluent reading, but they don't have enough vocabulary and meaning information to understand what they read. So I'm thinking about them also as you talk, and wondering the best way to prevent just them developing into a word caller.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, that's why I just want to go back to, we have to keep in mind, again, this is why it's more complicated, because all of these things are required for fluency. It's not just a matter of reading fast. You need the vocabulary, you need the comprehension skills, you need the background knowledge that's relevant. I mean, that's one of the reasons something like the simple text doesn't require a ton of background. It doesn't require none, right? Because you got to know what a spider and a snake. So there are some background knowledge requirements, but they're fairly modest, generally speaking. But as you go up the grades, those challenges become more challenging because the vocabulary gets more challenging, the texts get longer, denser, the ideas get more complicated, and fluency, that bottleneck is always lurking there because you can be fluent at a 2nd or 3rd grade level, and that is not sufficient to be fluent at a 5th, 6th grade or the level of that sentence that I used, that middle school, more or less level. You can be fluent early on, but if you don't continue supporting fluency as one of your literacy goals for your students, as the words get more complicated, as the sentences and paragraphs get longer, the concepts get denser, that fluency needs to be something you need to continue working on. And if vocabulary is missing, then you need to work on the vocabulary, certainly the vocabulary that's necessary for understanding the texts that they're expected to read, whether it's a textbook or the articles that you're having them read. You need to be mindful of all those things. I mean, I just don't see any alternative to having a very comprehensive view of what's needed to maintain fluency and then being mindful of where kids might be falling back. And one of the problems that I see is because comprehension is so important and we tend to poo-poo foundational skills later on, those foundational skills develop, I'm going to mix my metaphors again, those foundational skills develop cracks, right? What's foundational in 2nd grade is not the same as foundational in 6th grade, with more complex decoding, but also more complex words, longer words, denser concepts. So you got to always be thinking about those foundational skills as you're building comprehension, meaning, background knowledge, and the rest. I mean, it's a ongoing challenge until the children develop, some level of English proficiency. And even then it's an ongoing challenge. I mean, it's an ongoing challenge for English speakers, right? You have to help them continue to develop fluency, but since it's their first language, they've been speaking it, from birth, it's relatively easier. Not easy. We know that, academic language is a challenge to teach. English learners are not. But for English learners, it's particularly difficult because literally it's the language that they're learning. So the only answer Kristen and I can give is you've got to be mindful of all these things, how they fit together, and shore them up as necessary, but making sure you maintain that fluency, which is the bridge to comprehension. It reflects comprehension and it enables comprehension. That was a long-winded answer to something you already knew, but that's the only thing I can tell you.
If I could add something, you mentioned read alouds. I
Yes.
can't stress enough the importance of read alouds, especially for ELs. The automaticity, the prosody, and emphasis on language and expanding on vocabulary during read aloud. Just 10 minutes a day of read alouds is profound for so many kids. But this again, I think encompasses all that you're saying, and that's kids really pick up on effective read alouds.
Yeah. And it's also, Sharon, you're absolutely right. It's also, to my major theme here, it's also a time to model, illustrate, and point out fluent reading.
That's what I model. They have to have a model. They have to know what automatic reading, fluent reading with prosody looks like, and it helps with the meaning of the language.
Yes, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. That's great. So let me turn to the second way to help eliminate those what did I call them? Bottlenecks. I have a bottleneck in my thinking. So, but there's also, it's important to facilitate automatic letter and word recognition, because particularly in the early stages, a lot of times we focus on fluency when it comes to text reading or word reading. But many things that I've learned from Marianne Wolf, who I'm sure many of you know or are familiar with, is that you need to be working on fluency from the very beginning. You want kids to recognize letters immediately. You want them to be able to associate letter with sound immediately. First, you want to go, again, the model is the same. You want to go for accuracy, then automaticity. Accuracy, then automaticity, because if they have bottlenecks in recognizing letters and associating letters with sounds, if they have bottlenecks in segmenting phonemes, that creates early bottlenecks that then have to be undone. It's almost like a big wreck, right? At the very beginning, you have a wreck, and then cars are following too close, and so pretty soon a 2-car wreck becomes a 20-car pileup. And you don't want a 20-car pileup when the kids are in later elementary and middle school. So you've got to be thinking about automaticity and accuracy early on at the letter, sound, and of course the word recognition level, even at the very beginning stages of learning to read. So you want to know that relevant phonic or spelling rules are known and can be applied automatically. You want to also explicitly teach irregular words and practice recognizing them fluently. But also you want to point out, before I get to that, that even irregular words typically have regular aspects to them. So even a really crazy word like through, Through, which could be Threw, which could be a bunch of other things, that TH is routinely TH. And the R that comes after the TH is always an R. So there are regular elements of irregular words, and you want to reinforce that, because what you want to minimize is kids memorizing words as huge blocks. Now, for portions that are irregular and really not decodable, you have no choice. But you have words that have some regular elements that respect rules of, regular orthographic rules, and you want to point those out even when the words you're reading are irregular. and you want to practice recognizing and reading them fluently. The other thing you want to do, we have a new definition that I recently learned from Linnea Airy, well, recently, a few years ago. You know, we used to think of sight words as undecodable words, irregular words that you kind of learn to read as a blob. You know, you recognize them by sight because they're not decodable. Well, we have a new definition of sight words that I hope you're familiar with, stemming from the concept of orthographic mapping, which I assume many of you are familiar with. And the concept of orthographic mapping is that when you see a word and you associate, you decode, you use your letter sound knowledge to connect the letters of the word with the sounds they represent, and then connect that connection to meaning, that's called orthographic mapping. Think of it as like a three-legged stool. Once you see words with letters the sounds of which you recognize, and you can make that binding, it's what the neuroscientists call binding, and then you bind that to semantics, and you see that a number of times, pretty soon that's a sight word. Now, it's a word that you can decode, but you don't want to decode every time you see it. It's very inefficient, and it's an obstacle to comprehension. That's the more contemporary meaning of sight words, words that are decodable in principle, but you want to recognize by sight, because that's how you build a bank of words that facilitates automaticity, accuracy, accurate, appropriate speed, and prosody. You want to make as many words sight words as possible, so kids are not laboriously decoding them. You can have cumulative word lists, or with flashcards, or word lists that you add to the kids practice to increase automaticity of word recognition. You want to use games and friendly competitions to challenge accuracy and automaticity. And you want to use use known words to challenge students' increasingly automatic recognition. And this can be done in the context of games, friendly competitions, things that kids typically enjoy doing. You want to be careful, of course, because some kids are going to latch on a little more slowly, and competition can be sometimes a two-edged sword. But you know, as skilled teachers, how to use competition in a way that's productive rather than kind of demotivating for some kids. Then, of course, you want to do lots and lots and lots of reading to practice, challenge, and extend those developing word recognition skills. So to prevent and eliminate bottlenecks, reading fluency, you want to model and call out fluent reading, as Sharon pointed out. You want to use different text genres that typically are read differently. You're going to read a narrative. We're getting into some subtleties here, but you're going to read a narrative differently than an expository informational text, and that's appropriate distinction to make in the higher grades. When students are reading aloud, you want to prompt with read like you're talking, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. You want to have students practice sight reading, new but accessible text, not too hard, not too easy, in their ZPD, shall we say. You want to use reader's theater, as we mentioned several times, with opportunities to practice the text and then perform in a meaningful, communicative sort of way. And you want to use this very simple model. You want to model fluent reading. You want to have kids practice that fluent reading, and then you want to provide them feedback. Repeat. And this has got to be a part of the regular reading, language arts, or even in the content areas. If you're reading some social studies text, fluency is something that can be practiced under any circumstance. Now, of course, there's the tyranny of time, right? We don't have time to fit in everything that we need to. So you have to be very efficient and choose your strategies strategically. But I would strongly encourage reading fluency as you go up the grades to be part of the toolkit that you use to propel kids' literacy development for all kids, but again, especially for English learners. So just in sum, you want to build on the excellent foundational skills work that I'm sure you've been doing in your classrooms, but you want to build fluency along the way. Accuracy and automaticity with letters and words, and an appropriate rate and prosody with text. Those four things are really essential for fluency: accuracy, automaticity, appropriate rate, and prosody. And too often those last two we tend to kind of sideline, but we need the foreground. So here are the references that I mentioned. Again, if you want any of these things, I can't send you Elsa Cardenas-Hagen's book, unfortunately. If you want it, you'll have to get it yourselves. But it's a really good one. If you're not familiar with it, you should be for English learners. And then some of these others that are on the internet, but usually behind paywall. So email me, I'd be glad to send you a PDF. And here's the obligatory multilingual thank you. So thank you very much. I think I've come in almost under 10 minutes. Oh, we got 7 minutes. So I'm going to stop talking now, and thank you very much.
Perfect. That was perfect. Thank you so, so much. There weren't too many questions in the chat, but if you have some, folks, please drop them in, or you can unmute yourself and ask away. We do have one asking about sight reading that you referred to.
Aha. What is sight reading? Okay, yeah, I should have paused on that. Well, I'll tell you, I don't have any research on this, full disclosure. But I took this as an example. How many of you play or played an instrument as a young person? So I used to play the violin, never very well, but I tried for a while. And I remember that one of the things that happened is I was taking lessons, and then later on I tried to play the piano, is that from time to time my teacher would put a piece of music in front of me that he or she knew were within my technical abilities, right? She wouldn't give me, Beethoven's third violin concerto. I don't think he wrote three, but a violin concerto, something appropriate for a, beginning intermediate, and had me sight read it. So I had to see it for the first time and play it. And I believe that helped develop my fluency, because I had to really process really quickly the relationship between the notes that I saw and where I put my fingers on the fingerboard. Now, is this a good analogy? I don't know. It makes sense to me that if you want to have someone practice fluency, one of the things you do, and it's just one of them, I mean, I would never rely exclusively on this, is to encourage them to be quicker in processing the visual input with either what you're reading or what you're playing, to just practice developing facility in processing the words or the music, whatever the subject is. It's a hunch. If I were to do another study, I'm done doing studies, but if I were to do another study, I'd probably do a study on this because it makes sense to me. But I'll tell you, a lot of people make analogies that make sense, but don't necessarily pan out. So full disclosure, I think it's something that might help. I would encourage you to try it out, if you think it makes sense. I know it gave me some more confidence to play the instrument when I could see something for the first time and play something that was a reasonable rendition of the music that was presented. So I have positive. So it was challenging, for sure it was challenging, but it was the right kind of challenge that I found. So I recall it as a positive experience. But check it out and tell me if I'm all wet. I'm happy to hear it. Nice try, Claude, but it didn't work. Kristen, did I answer the question of what is sight reading?
I
Kristen
think so,
Shea.
yeah.
It was Kristen Shea who was asking it.
Yeah, Kristen Shea. As you describe it, I'm thinking of a cold read where the students haven't necessarily seen the text before.
Okay. No, I think that's right. That's exactly right. I was using my musical analogy. It's a cold read, but you want it to be at an appropriate level. I think it's really important to put it at a level that gives them confidence rather than frustrates them. Yeah.
Any others?
Would repeated reading of passages be a valuable approach for ELs? Yeah, I think so. I think probably for kids in general, repeated readings would be helpful, particularly if you're working on, I'm thinking again in the context of fluency, because when you're reading and you first read it, you may be, kind of a little tentative. And then if you were to read it again, particularly if you want to read it aloud more fluently, I think it'd contribute to fluency and could also, build confidence. I tend to be very sort of cognitive and academic and think about skills, but there's also the SEL, the socio-emotional part. You want to do things that'll build confidence. And I think that could be one way to build confidence and comprehension as well. So I would think that repeated reading, again, used judiciously. Now, what does judiciously mean? I don't know. Use it every other thing you read. I mean, there are a lot of questions like that I can't, quantify or give you any rules of thumb, but certainly, particularly something that you think is maybe at the student's kind of independent, sort of instructional level, and you want to move it up to I'm using very old terminology, right? Frustration, instructional independent, or you can talk about ZPD, but something that's their instructional level and you want to move it up to something they could be independent with, then repeated reading, I would hypothesize would be helpful for that.
I found it was helpful at my school. Repeated reading of familiar text was very helpful.
Was it for the ELs in particular or for kids in general?
Kids in general, but our ELs flourished.
99.5% accuracy. Right. I mean, that's typically the rule of thumb that's given. Some people might say that 90% is kind of low, that once you get below 95%, comprehension gets really compromised. I guess partly it depends on the level of familiarity, but yeah, my guess is you want to be at 95%. But there's some research on this. They look at the relationship between comprehension and percent words read correctly.
We used Acadians and we at least 97, 98% accuracy with the older students.
For adequate comprehension. Yeah, so I think 95, I think 90 is probably dipping too low. It could dip into frustration level.
Good. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Mara to share the screen, but I don't want you to stop your questions. So if you think of something as we roll through here toward the end, please drop it in the chat. We want to take advantage of Claude's expertise while we have him with us. There are a couple of things that we wanted you to know before we sign off tonight. Number one, we have been so fortunate this first year of our launch to have founding members join our chapter. A founding member is what we consider a paid membership, and it is special to this first year of our chapter, and it is going away the end of June. So the slide that you're looking at now shows a coupon code to join the chapter. And if I could get maybe one of the board members to drop the bit.ly or the link into the chat, or you can click the QR code on the screen, right? But that coupon code will get you $5 off of the paid membership. We will always have a free membership, so if you haven't already joined, you can do that as well. And then we wanted to tell you about a couple of events coming up. This one is from the Reading League National. If you want to learn more about the curriculum evaluation reports, there is an event at the end of the month, and I can drop that link in the chat. And then the next slide is for the Reading League Compass. This is a new part of the Reading League website. It also has a new element on the compass that points you toward curriculum evaluation. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, we encourage you to do that as well. Let me see if I can drop that in the chat. There was recently a ribbon cutting ceremony for this new curriculum tool, and it's excellent. It should really help those folks who are adopting new curriculum or making curriculum decisions. So check that out when you have time. Is there one more, Mara? I think there's one more. Oh, yep. Lastly, if you have not yet been to a Reading League National Conference, registration is open for next year's conference in October, and the agenda is posted. So if you're interested to check out the agenda and go to Charlotte in October, it's a fantastic conference and definitely well worth it. So I think that might be it. Yay. All right, Mara, you could probably stop sharing screen so we can see everyone's faces before we go. Claude, I just want to say thank you again to the chapter for being the capstone of our launch year. We appreciate your time and your expertise and all you do statewide in California to support evidence-based literacy practices. We can't thank you enough.
Yes, thank you.
All right, everyone, have a fantastic end of
Sorry,
your
Kristen,
school-
I was on mute. I
Yeah.
was just thanking
Oh,
you
no.
and all your colleagues for what you do, and I just realized I launched into it being mute, so I apologize for that. Thanks for having me. It was great to see you all. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. And to the rest of you, everyone, happy end of another school year. I know it was a huge success, and I hope you will take some nuggets with you from tonight into the remainder of this year and definitely into next year. All right, everyone, have a great evening. We'll see you in the fall.